Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed ahead of the curve. Welcome to the Into podcast. Today I'm joined with my counterpart, Derek Cottrill in Northwest Missouri, and Rodney Phelps in Illinois. How you guys doing?
Great.
Doing good, Nick.
Awesome. Well, guys, I thought maybe we could start off. We've got a little deeper into harvest, start out with some updates from the geographies, where we're at, harvest-wise, yields, etc. Derek, if you maybe want to start us off.
Sure. Well, it came a long way since a couple weeks ago. My report, we're a little slow. I felt like getting started off with harvest, but now, I'm not even sure if I'd say we're at 50%, but we're moving along very quick. And it still kind of same reports in terms of yields, things like that. We talked about it being highly variable, but anything from 175 to I think my highest 270 bushel corn. Now, one thing that's been pretty consistent in my area, and this might change as beans dry down, but bean yields have been really good here over the last couple of weeks in terms of 75, 85 bushel beans, but we're still got guys harvesting there in that 10 to 12% moisture range, and beans change quick. Now, so all in all, harvest is going very well, just more variable, but we are catching some rain today. Last night, between yesterday and this morning, we've had anywhere from 1.5 inches to 2 inches in my territory. So combines are going to slow down for just a little bit, but I think we got a good start going.
Awesome, man. What about you, Rodney?
Well, Derek bragging on the rain. We had a whopping, 700ths, maybe. Looks like that's about all we're going to get. In my proper where I live, we had maybe 2 to 3 tenths across the whole territory, which is far less than we need. We are drier than dry and having field fires and issues like that. I'll have to talk the same as Derek. Variability in the corn crop is the big buzz. Anybody that treated with fungicide once and sometimes twice are rewarded to the tune of 40, 50, 60 bushel. But I will say the corn crop, very surprising, good and bad. And Southern Rust, as I said last time, came in with a vengeance, and it just took the top right off of this crop. So the corn is better than most guys thought it would be, but not near as good as it was a year ago or could have been this year. And it's dry. We're taking number 2 corn right out of the field. So beans, the early beans were great to the tune of 80 to 100 bushel. The later beans are tailing off. Now they're still good. They're still in the 70s and 80s, but they tailed off. The problem we have in the beans is they're single digits dry. So we're talking 8, 9% beans, which the shatter, and they're just leaving that yield in the field because there's no water in them. So as far as progression, we're over 50% done with harvest. A lot of beans are out, and guys are now hammering on the corn. So overall, been a good fall, but just a lot of environmental things hurt us in 25.
Appreciate that, Rodney. I guess, yeah, I'm somewhere between you two. I mean, it's been a big run, as Rodney said, not a lot of weather to slow things down, and got guys that are going to finish up this week and other other guys still in the middle of it, the midst of it. You hit it on the word variability. That's the main word for this year. Extremely variable. I've heard as low as 115 bushel field average to as high as 300. Most of it has been 200, 200 plus, but got some areas really close to last year's yields of super high, the best they've ever had. And then I've got some that are above average, and then some guys that are running more at average. But just interesting how it's more pocketed this year than it was last. To Rodney's point, I mean, there's some things like fungicide, 25 to 30 plus seems to be the general trend. Where they did fungicide versus where they didn't. Where they didn't fungicide, the corn is dry. And then top dress, kind of depends on what a guy's nitrogen total program and timings look like. But I've seen some responses 20 to 25, 30 bushels. So some big responses to end, which should be expected with as wet as we were this spring. Soybeans, yeah, extreme variability. I've heard from 30 to 80. That kind of varies based on geography and planting date. To Rodney's point, the earlier planted ones have been the best as we tail off in the later May. I think especially we probably get into June, they're really going to tail off some, just with the way we didn't get any rain there in August. But getting some really good response to some of the foliar treatments that we did, and then fungicide, insecticide. I've had a couple of ways where that's been 10 bushel, where guys treated soybeans with fungicide, insecticide. So yeah, I guess just to hit on what you guys were talking about, just extreme variability out there, just able to keep plowing forward with the lack of rain that we've had. Not quite as dry as Rodney, but we are on the drier side for sure. Well, guys, I guess just wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the fertilizer thing. I mean, I know that's still the hottest topic this fall, and we thought it might be good to follow back up, circle back, especially on the phosphorus side, since that's kind of the number one everybody's talking about with it being higher cost versus potash. We can hit on a little bit on the potash, the sulfur piece at the end, but thought we might do a little bit more of a deep dive on the phosphorus. Kind of a lot of my conversations lately have been around phosphorus availability, how the tie-up works, just a little bit more on the basics, the fundamentals of it, which kind of helps people understand how it works, why I would put more on, less on, etc. So I guess maybe I'd start off with you, Rodney, just a little bit. You start thinking about foundations. We mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but one of the foundational things about soil fertility is pH and managing pH. I guess from a pH standpoint, how does that impact phosphorus availability?
Yeah, good question, Nick. So I'm going to go back to soil test, and we've hammered on soil test just about every time we talk, but keeping that pH in check is paramount in any of our nutrients, but especially phosphorus. And if we get too low of a phosphorus, the iron and the aluminum tie up the phosphorus. And so we've got to keep the pH in check. So lime is your friend. And you want to make sure, number one, you have a test on the lime too, so we know what our analysis is. But keeping the pH in check will help our phosphorus greatly. Now, a too low, so a too high is just as bad as a too low. So we want to keep that pH in check. And once again, we need to start soil testing more frequently than every 4 years because we need to know what our soil is doing and how we can affect it annually by having current soil tests. So the biggest thing is making sure our pH is in check. And we're not talking chemistry today, but some of our chemistry performance is very dependent on pH also. So we're not just hammering on pH for our nutrients. We're also hammering on pH for our performance of our other herbicides, fungicides, anything that we're doing in the crop is very pH dependent.
Those are all good points, Rodney. And I think that kind of hits on, phosphorus, one of the main drivers when we start talking about nutrient availability by pH. It's one that quickly gets tied up at a high pH with things like calcium, magnesium, but at a low pH, it gets tied up rather quickly with things like aluminum and iron. So yeah, you have great points by you. I would also say, with that in mind, being tied up by some of these positive cations like aluminum, iron, or calcium at a high pH, that's where banding can come into play. And we're banding things, if we're banding with the planter, we're banding with strip till. So you kind of help increase availability because you reduce the amount of surface area that those positive cations can tie up. So you increase the amount of total available phosphorus. And that's also a place where some products, some additive phosphorus products that help protect phosphorus and keep it from getting tied up, that's where they can have a fit too as well. I mean, obviously you want to make sure you're using something that's reputable, but it might be a year where protecting your phosphorus, getting the most efficiency possible out of it might make sense, especially when it's higher cost or higher price like this. Um, with that said, Derek, I know there's some folks out there, and we've had this conversation, but some folks that like to do biannual applications, like they like to do a spread all ahead of corn for both a corn and soybean rotation, versus guys that might do an annual application where they apply ahead of both corn and soybeans. I guess number one, what's your thoughts on that? What's the difference between the two?
I think it kind of depends a little bit on the situation that you're in, first off, and I know with fertilizer prices and things like that, um, we're trying to do anything this year to be as efficient as possible and smart with our spending, things like that. But I guess biannual versus annual depends on, to me, if you're in that a build program versus a say you're already in what we would call maintenance range or in that range of the nutrients where we can hit our yield goal type deal. Um, Annual applications data will show you that are much more efficient at building those with annual applications versus biannual. I'd highly recommend looking at the annual application, but also, I guess at a bare minimum, doing your crop removal is going to be important. But if you're in a build program, I would highly encourage you to make sure you stick with that. Fertilizer prices might be high right now, but taking a year off, if we have a crop that removes more nutrients, that's just more that we have to build, and going to be harder for us in the future to build those up to levels that we need to be at type deal. So,
So from that aspect, Derek, I mean, the if we went to a more annual application, I guess what's the benefits to that from getting the most efficiency possible out of phosphorus?
you're giving a less chance for it to tie up, type deal. I mean, let's just remember phosphorus in the soil, it doesn't move. Um, and like we just talked about, that pH one being extremely important. But by not allowing it to tie up in the soil, and applying it more timely whenever we can apply directly to the crop when it comes to phosphorus, things like that, we're going to be way more efficient with it. Um, Not sure if
Another
that answers
com
the question there, Nick, but
Another comment I'll make is by going to annual application, we have a better handle on what crop we took off of the given year, and then we can manage, moving forward what we need to put back and how we want to look forward. If we fertilize for two crops, we honestly don't know what those crops are going to take off. And so we're gambling that we put enough on. So annual gives us a chance. I'm going to go back soil test, look at our soil test. Where are we at? What kind of crop did we have this year? And then fertilize accordingly for moving forward. So good points. And then we need to make then we by doing it annually we know what we've taken and what our soil test is telling us.
yeah, Rodney, you bring up a good point. I mean, you're exactly right, because we don't know what the weather's going to be like next year and what that bean crop's going to do. If, say, you're fertilizing ahead of corn, I don't know what the bean crop's going to do here in a couple of years. But if we have a really good year and it ends up taking up more phosphorus than what we were anticipating for, yeah, you are better off applying per year for each crop.
Obviously, it depends on how much you were putting on. I mean, if you're putting a ton on, maybe you don't see this, but there's data out there to support that annual application increases yields, and probably one of the biggest ahas to the guys that I work with that have switched from that biannual to the annual application is just the fact that their soybean yields, especially when they were just fertilizing a head of corn, have gone up because they're no longer forcing those beans to scavenge for the nutrients. They're actually applying what they need, to your guys'
Exactly. You
point.
can apply as much as you want. And, now in 2 years from now, there's nothing to say that that's going to be available, right? And so that's what we got to remember from that aspect.
Yeah, great points, guys. I also think a little bit about how phosphorus moves in the plant and moves via diffusion, which don't need to get in a whole big long talk about that. But all it means is it goes from the higher the gradient between the low amount of phosphorus in the root and the high amount of phosphorus in the soil, the higher you get it, the bigger the gradient or the less of the gradient, it pushes that across. But so I just think about that with biannual versus annual apps. So you might get a lot of forced diffusion if you're fertilizing a head of corn for both crops, but when it comes to the soybean crop, there's not. So there's not this force across this gradient. There's not either more equilibrium, I guess is the word I'm trying to use. But if we're fertilizing ahead of both crops, then we're kind of increasing that. So we're forcing more across that gradient, which it's just the way phosphorus moves. And essentially what I'm saying is we can help it move quicker, better with an annual app than we can with a biennial. Um, with that said, I mean, I guess one other thing, guys, to think about besides that is just what you guys were hitting at, which was crop removal. And so I just want to say, don't forget about that too. Rodney's kind of hit on that point. And Derek's hit on it too, as far as keeping in mind, being able to adjust based on crop removal. I'll just make the comment, if you're 200 bushel corn, you're removing 74 pounds of phosphate roughly. If you're 250 bushel corn, that's about 93 pounds of phosphate. And then we start thinking about soybeans, they remove less phosphate and more potash, but still a relatively big user. You think about 70 bushel beans, you're just over 56 pounds of phosphate, and 90 bushel beans, you're moving up close to 72 pounds. So there's a decent amount of removal there. To Derek's point on the biennial versus annual apps, there's a reason why we can't treat soybeans like a scavenger crop because they actually do use phosphorus, contrary to some belief out there. Um, the other thing, and you guys were hitting on this as far as yield goals too, just keep in mind if you've removed any big crops, you want to be sure that you're adjusting for that. So if I fertilize for 160 bushel corn, but I took off 240, there's a huge gradient there that I got to make up for at some point in time. And that's to Derek's point where an annual app might help you out. The other thing, I guess, last for both of you guys, and I don't know who wants to hit on it, but we're hitting on phosphorus just because that seems to be where the conversations are at right now with the higher costs. But what do you guys want to mention potentially when it comes to potash, when it comes to sulfur?
Yeah, so potash is a big aha. We're talking about phosphorus because it is higher priced, and so that's everybody's what should I do? But if you look at potash, a 240 bushel uh, corn crop takes off 324 pounds of potash. So, and then beans take another 150 pounds. So, potash is one that we don't want to um, look past either. And then I'll throw sulfur in there. We've talked sulfur a lot, and so I'm not advocating that we put all sulfur on in the fall, but we need to treat sulfur like we do top dressing nitrogen and other things of multiple times throughout the growing season, because sulfur will help phosphorus uptake. It will help all nutrients to uptake in a plant. And so I guess those two things right there, potash and sulfur, we don't want to look past. I'm going to come back again. I sound like a broken record. We have to have soil tests so that we know what's going on. And, it's funny when you ask some guys, where you at? Where's your soil test? Well, I think. And so we need to press them. And, if we're looking at not spending a lot of money, a soil test is very economical for what it tells you. And we also need to all of us need to know how to read that soil test so that we actually know what it's telling us. And, so that we can, because I was just looking at a soil test and I'm trying not to go down a rabbit hole, but real quickly, uh, grows at why is it not working? Well, his magnesium and calcium saturations were so extremely high that nothing could work. We've got to do something to fix that because nothing is moving because our saturations of those two elements are so high that it's not allowing the soil profile to work.
I don't know if I'd have much. I mean, maybe just reiterate a couple things that Rodney said there too. We've hit on hard on phosphorus this talk, and the talk is about the high price of that. I guess I would just remind everyone, remember sticking to those basics of a good soil fertility program. Number one's pH. Don't forget about that one. Rodney already mentioned the soil report, but we can get wrapped up in these high prices all we want, but they don't matter if our soil pH is off and things like that. And good soil fertility goes way beyond phosphorus. And so it takes all those nutrients. And if we get axle wrapped around one particular nutrient, we're not gaining any ground there. And so remember that as we go into this fall here, fixing that pH and understanding. Rodney mentioned, the calcium and the magnesium that was way off, and those base saturations, things like that. Like there's got to be a balance out there. And so figure out which one's your limiting factor and what's holding you back type deal would be my advice.
Good points, guys. I mean, I guess just to wrap that up, just in general, pH is important for phosphorus availability. So really, that is the foundation. You got to get your pH right to increase availability. Banding or phosphorus additive products, things you might treat the fertilizer with, to uh, increase phosphorus availability, reduce the amount of that's can really help, especially in a year when we want to become more efficient. We talked about the biannual versus annual applications of fertilizer. Might be a good year to switch to annual apps if you're doing biannual. Just it's not going to add a lot of costs, but it's going to make you a whole lot more efficient with what you are putting out. And there's yield increases to show that it does do that. And then what you guys just mentioned on the potash and sulfur, like this is a year where you might be able to potash, sulfur, they're more economically priced than phosphorus right now. Might be a good year really to double down, especially on potash and just with higher price phosphorus. But yeah, you guys hit on it. I mean, the soil test, and Rodney's point, is the cheapest, best investment that we can make right now, and it's probably one that we ought to make if we haven't done it for a while. But appreciate you guys joining me today. Appreciate you guys your sharing your info and your knowledge on phosphorus and potassium, sulfur, and we look forward to you guys joining us next time.
Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.